Okay, everybody, I've been practicing, okay? Prepare yourselves for the greatest sword technique ever! Clear your mind and let's do it! Wait for it. Wait for it. My sword technique must have been so good that it transcended the bounds of time and space, and the slice that I just performed happened either millions of years ago in the distant past, or perhaps millions of years ago in the far future. Yeah, let's go with that. Okay, hey everybody, how are you doing? Tekking and Barry and Zoro here today for a cameo. Are you guys ready to talk about a bunch of characters that we really don't know anything about? Discussing timelines and if a character is still alive or not, or who's son or brother or grandson? Well, you came to the right place. Here we are. Alright, so, damn it, Kawamatsu. You know, Kawamatsu, he's hanging out on the battlefield with Old Man Hyo, watching Zoro fight against King, and he just happens to drop that line of dialogue like, hey, Old Man Hyo, did you ever notice that Zoro, this samurai, I mean, he's like a samurai, kind of, from another distant sea, from, like, the other side of the planet, is using the Santoryu, is using the three-sword style, which just happens to be the same sword style that Ushimaru Shimotsuki used, you know, the daimyo of the Ringo region, and then it's even more weird when you think that Ryuma was the distant ancestor of Ushimaru Shimotsuki, and, you know, he had one eye, just like Zoro has, you know, one eye. You know, it's funny, you'd think they would have realized this a long time ago. It's like, I guess they did, but Kawamatsu never just thought to bring it up to anybody before this. It's like, yes, in the middle of this massive war zone where, you know, there's beast pirates attacking all over the place, this is where Kawamatsu decides to, like, hey, Old Man Hyo, you know, it's like, this seems like a discussion that should really be had after the battle is over and they're drinking some sake or something. Like, did you notice that Zoro's over there using three swords? Wow, I've seen that before. Oh yeah, I know, right? So, okay. All right. Now, we already were under the impression, I think everybody kind of pieced it together at this point, Zoro is related to Ryuma, right? Like, he just is. Ryuma was the main character in Oda's one-shot called Monsters, and his design there looks very similar to Zoro's design, and he is canon in the One Piece world because of Thriller Bark, and we learned about all that stuff. So you could assume that, yes, this great swordsman, the sword god from 400 years ago, yeah, his blood runs in Zoro's veins, okay? It was always just debatable whether or not he was a direct descendant of Ryuma, you know, like his great whatever grandson, or if it was like a distant cousin, or like the family tree, or whatever, how that would have worked, okay? I should also bring up, though, because I did do a video, I believe, last year talking about Monsters, like the actual series, so I'll leave a link to that somewhere, maybe in a card or something. You go check that out. I don't think the actual storyline of Monsters is canon in the One Piece world, because, like, Ryuma was walking through, like, an old west town and everything like that, but as for Ryuma's design and his swordsmanship and everything, by the way, in the Monsters one-shot, Ryuma did not use Shusui. That was something Oda included in One Piece, kind of, like, spiced him up a little bit, basically dusted off that old character concept and, like, hey, I really liked Ryuma as a character. I'm going to bring him back in the One Piece world, but he's not the same Ryuma. I'm going to give him, like, a really cool sword and a different backstory, but he still was a samurai, and he still did use a katana, and he still did slay a dragon, which also happened in the Monsters one-shot, right? So that stuff was the same, but, like, everything else, like, whatever Oda might have done with Ryuma in Monsters, had that series continued, is probably very different from this Ryuma. One of the most notable things is that it was stated Ryuma was a one-eyed swordsman. That was not the case in Monsters. He had both eyes in Monsters, okay? So, and that was something that really caught us all off guard, because during Thriller Bark, you know, his eyes were basically rotted away. He was basically a mummy, and we saw him having a bandage over his eye, but he also had, like, a bandage on his other side, and we saw, like, a scar there, so we're like, okay, and we never really thought that, like, oh, Ryuma clearly must have only had one eyeball while he was living. You know, that wasn't the case, because we just didn't know, but now it's been revealed, and it makes perfect sense, okay? So, the Shimotsuki Clan, yeah, we got Shimotsuki Ushimaru, we got Shimotsuki Kozaburo, we got Shimotsuki Ryuma, which up until now it was mentioned he did have the Shimotsuki name, but it was kind of, up for debate there whether or not it was his actual family name or if that was just his title, because Shimotsuki just means frost moon, and frost moon is the November moon. That just happens to be the month that Zoro is born, so you see how all this connects back. But, it's possible that Ryuma might have had the title of Shimotsuki, and he was the progenitor of the Shimotsuki clan. Like, it started with him using his title as the family name, and it continued down through the generations. But no, it was in fact his actual family name. He was Ryuma Shimotsuki. Okay, therefore he's related to Ushimaru Shimotsuki, as well as Kozaburo Shimotsuki and Yasuie Shimotsuki, because it was the Shimotsuki clan that led Hakumai and the Ringo region. They were the only two daimyos that shared the same family name of two different regions of Wano, which also lets me think that if we're going to follow the theory that Wano was like towed together by all the different ancient giants back in the day, like different islands pulled together to make the country of Wano that we know about right now, it's possible the original country may have been Ringo, and then Hakumai got pulled in, or vice versa, and then it was the Shimotsuki clan that kind of headed it up. This was probably thousands of years ago, even before the Void Century, and then more and more islands got towed to the point where they just assumed that was their island. That was the way their homeland always looked, because it was like lost to history or whatever, right? That's why the Shimotsuki clan are like this big family, and so Yasu is like distantly related to Ryuma as well as Zoro, in order to make all this make sense. There you go. All right. So, let's talk about Ushimaru here. Okay. So, the few things that we know about Ushimaru. We know that 20 years ago, all of the daimyo of Wano got together as a rebellion force against Kaido. That was after Oden had been killed, and basically Kaido and Orochi had asked all the other daimyos, Yasu and Ushimaru, as well as the daimyo Uzuki and Fugetsu clans and Yamasuki clan and everybody, bend the knee to me and I'll let you live, or, defy me and I'll just slaughter all of you. Of course, these are samurai of Wano, so they're like, screw you, we will never bend the knee. So they all went to fight against Kaido, and the way Yasu tells it, in fact, I have the manga chapter right here for convenience. The daimyo and people of each land immediately took up arms, but we failed to overcome the monster that is Kaido, and Wano was razed to the ground. To my disappointment, I survived the battle and took living in Ebisu town in disguise. So that was Yasuie, okay? So Yasu was the only survivor of this rebellion war that the rest of the daimyo waged against Kaido, implying that Ushimaru died right there. How old was he when he died? Because that could definitely help us out with the timelines. We do not know. But there is another moment that we actually do get to see Ushimaru and Onimaru, and it was 39 years ago. We don't see their faces, but here they are, clearly, and they are reading the newspaper after Oden had managed to defeat Ashura Doji and unite all of the Kuri region, okay? So they're reading the report about this 39 years ago, and he seems to be already, like, a young adult, at least Zoro's age, like 17, 18 at the youngest. Maybe he's in his mid-20s here. Is he already the daimyo at this moment, or is his father still the daimyo? We do not know. Could his father have been Kozaburo Shimotsuki, the samurai that was the crafter, not really a samurai so much as he was a swordsmith that crafted the Wado Ichimonji as well as the Enma, and he was good friends with Tenguyama Hitetsu. And 55 years ago, Kozaburo left the land of Wano illegally, made it to the East Blue, started Shimotsuki Village. His son is Koshiro, who taught Zoro and Kuina is in fact Kozaburo's granddaughter. As well as this, we also know that when Zoro was a little kid training in the dojo, Kozaburo was still alive, because that's where Zoro heard the Tsunachi phrase, like when the warriors of Wano would, jump off or do some really dangerous. It was basically the Wano equivalent of YOLO, but it was Tsunachi, right? And so Zoro said, I learned that phrase from an old man in my village. Now, that was when Zoro was a kid, so Kozaburo might be dead right now, because he was already probably a really old dude by that point. Let me bring that up really quick, because we don't know anything about the age of Kozaburo or Ushimaru for that matter, but I drew a little timeline comparison where where this could work. This could work if Ushimaru was a certain age during this 39 years ago flashback, and Kozaburo just happened to live to a very old age. This could still work, okay? Let me ask you, how old do you think Kozaburo was when he left the land of Wano? Because here's some things to keep in mind. He was already established as one of the greatest swordsmiths, if not the greatest swordsmith in all of Wano. He forged the damn Wado. He forged the damn Enma. Okay, and he presented the Enma to the Kozutsuki clan, to Sukiyake, for the, Odin, his son, to have, okay? As for Ame no Habakiri, that was Tengumaru Hitetsu that made that, which implies that they were both, like, buddies and they worked together. Tenguyama created Ame no Habakiri, Kozaburo created Enma, alright? So, I find it hard to believe that Kozaburo left Wano 55 years ago when he was, like, in his 20s or anything like that. I mean, I guess it's possible he could have just been a genius when it came to swordsmithing and blacksmithing and everything like that, and by the age of 23, he'd already been like, I'm the best swordsmith there is in Wano. Like, nobody makes him better than Kozaburo. He's just a prodigy. He's a genius. But I like to think that it took a very long time for him to be established with that kind of pedigree in the land. So, I don't know, maybe in his late 30s, let's just say 40 just to make it simple for me, because math is definitely not my strong suit. I don't know if you guys knew that. Let's say he was 40 years old when he left Wano 55 years ago. That would make him 95 if he's still alive right now. Totally possible, by the way. People in Wano, especially people that are superhuman, can live a lot longer, well into their 90s or over 100, as in the case with Dr. Kureha. But like I said earlier, he might be very well dead right now. So 10 years ago, when Zoro was still a kid training in the dojo and he first heard that term Sanachi, Kozaburo might have been into his 80s. If he was 40 when he left, and then that would have been 45 years after that when Zoro was a kid, he would have been 85 years old, something like that, and he still trained, and then he could have passed away at some point between then and when Zoro actually left the village to become a bounty hunter and eventually met Luffy and everybody like that, okay? So that could have been possible. He could have been well into his 40s when he left Wano. If that's the case, he could have been Ushimaru's father if, right here, when we see this flashback 39 years ago, if Ushimaru here is like in his mid-20s, like let's just say Ushimaru was 25 years old right there. That meant that he would have been born 64 years ago, which would have been, pretty much right there in the prime of like Kozaburo's life. Okay, so that could have still fit. Like I said, this could be a bunch of different ways. It depends on the ages of these characters and everything, but that could still happen. It could still be possible Kozaburo was the father of Ushimaru. Now, with that being in mind, is it possible that Ushimaru is Zoro's dad? Yes, it actually is. The timelines are kind of, like, sort of lining up really good here, which makes me think, like, it's definitely possible, but you never know. So Zoro is 21 years old. Ushimaru apparently dies during this Great Rebellion War 20 years ago, which means that Zoro could have already been born. He might have been born in Wano country, and, maybe Oda just didn't reveal that up until now because he wanted it to be a secret, because I know, he puts his ocean of origin as the East, but for all intents and purposes, he did grow up in the East. But okay, if Kozaburo is Ushimaru's dad, and Zoro is Ushimaru's son, let's say it was his infant son that he had, and, they're living in Wano 21 years ago, Kaido and Orochi have already gathered power at this point, and then eventually Odin tries to fight back with his scabbards, they lose, Odin is executed, the scabbards disappear. And then the daimyos, Yasu and Ushimaru and everybody are like, okay, we need to be the ones to finish off Kaido, we need to be the ones to rally, okay? And maybe he tells his wife, and maybe a few of his retainers, like, listen, if I don't make it back, take little baby Zoro. Maybe his actual name is Zoro Juro. Maybe take little baby Zoro Juro and get out of Wano as fast as you can. And, Ushimaru would have been a daimyo, so he would have been able to prepare the way out. Leaving Wano is a punishable offense, and they have guards and everything posted. Orochi and Kaido definitely did. But Ushimaru, being a daimyo, he might have had the connections, and, he might have been able to set everything up so they could get away. Maybe he could have ordered his retainers, like, you fellow samurai, you come fight with me against Kaido. And he left behind, like, maybe a dozen retainers, and he said, listen, you guys stay here, And if things are looking bad, your job is to distract Orochi and Kaido's guards that are guarding the ports so my family can get away. And they were like, yes, Daimyo Ushimaru, we will do that. And it's like, okay. And so his wife and a little infant, like 1-year-old Zoro, after they learned Ushimaru died, they left Wano. And where would they go? They would go to Ushimaru's or Zoro's grandfather's village, which had already been established in the east. They might have not actually have known that they set up a village. They just know, like, Ushimaru would have known, like, my father left this country years ago, and apparently, if he's still around, he would be in the east. Maybe they did communicate back and forth. Maybe they sent letters, secretly. That actually wouldn't have been that hard to do, really. If, as long as Orochi and Kaido were not in charge, Kozaburo sending a letter to Wano, I mean, it would have taken a very, very long time to get there, and you'd have to be careful because nothing's allowed to come in and out of the country. But if Ushimaru was already a daimyo, that's not too difficult to receive, secret letters from your dad across the world. It would just take a really long time to get there. And maybe they didn't, communicate all that often just for the safety of the family and everything. But, he sent him a letter at some point during the decades and like, hey, I arrived safely in the eastern seas. I've set up a village. I met somebody. We have a child. That would have been Koshiro, which I guess, if we're following along with this logic, that would make Koshiro and Ushimaru brothers, or half-brothers, same father, different mother, so that would be interesting there. And yes, that would also mean that Zoro and Kuina are related. So there's that there, right? Okay, it's okay. You could still have Zoro and Tashigi. You could still have the ship there, although they might also be related as well, so, maybe not so much there. But, that could be one way this could go, right? And then, therefore, if we're going along with that logic, and it was stated by Kawamatsu and Hyo that Ushimaru is the direct descendant of Ryuma. And here's the thing, when I was thinking direct descendant, I was thinking it had to, go immediately, Ryuma had one child, and then that one child had another one child. That doesn't make any sense. It's possible Ryuma could have had a bunch of kids. He could have had, 3 sons and 2 daughters or whatever. He was the sword god, after all. That definitely gives you a lot of credit in Wano when the sword god comes to town. That wasn't the only reason he was called the sword god, fun fact. But no, he might have had, a bunch of kids. And if Ryuma had a bunch of kids, then Zoro might have been the descendant of one of them, Ushimaru, and Kozaburo might have been descendant of another kid. Tashigi's clan might have been a descendant of another one, right? It could have all went that way. Although that doesn't really, well, it sort of does. I mean, it's, why Tashigi and Kuina look so similar together. They could be cousins, and that could be the situation there. I feel like I've talked about that before in another video where we were discussing, family trees and stuff. But I'm just saying, it all could make sense. It all could connect back. I don't really think that Oda is going to give us a full backstory with this, though. When I say backstory, I mean, how during Totland we had, a few chapters focusing on Sanji's proper backstory with the Germa. I don't think we're going to get anything like that, quite the same thing with Zoro. We might get a few flashback scenes, maybe, a chapter, but it's not going to be anything too relevant because most of this stuff happened when Zoro was a baby. So his backstory pretty much is with Shimotsuki Village training with Kuina when he was a kid, but he was a baby when all this was going on, so he doesn't have any memory of it, he doesn't know, it's just that's what happened, okay? But yeah, if the ages of Ushimaru and Kozaburo, they line up properly, Zoro's 21, Ushimaru died 20 years ago, he could be his son, it's totally possible. Now, let's talk about the Santoryu style, okay? Because Kawamatsu specifically said, and I forgot to bring it up in the video, but yeah, they use the same sword style, and Zoro's, style is very unique. He uses Santoryu, and we've really not seen any other swordsman in One Piece use Santoryu. We've seen Kaku with his Yontoryu, his 4-sword style. Hachi had his 6-sword style, of course. We've seen all these different variations, of course. But Santoryu, that's Zoro's bread and butter. That's his stuff. I guess technically Inuarashi now does use a variation of Santoryu because he has, he could have 2 swords in his hands and he has the sword, peg leg. So he has, the sword leg. So I guess he can use his own variation, of 3-sword style. But Zoro's is very refined and stuff. This is a thing that I'm not 100% sure if it's in the manga or the anime, because the anime does kind of change around Zoro's backstory a little bit. The fact that he was born or was raised in Shimotsuki Village is one of those things where, you know, in the anime it seems like he was traveling around the villages and just ran into Kuina at Shimotsuki and decided to study there. The manga makes it very clear, like, okay, he might not have been born in Shimotsuki Village, but Zoro had been there and was raised there ever since he was a baby. I feel like in the anime they did give an explanation on why Zoro wanted to use three-sword style, and it was like he was using a bunch of swords at once, and then he narrowed it down to just two, and then eventually after Kuina died, he picked up the Wado and he said he'd practice three-sword style. You know, it's a thing that, like, Oda could always retcon it, but then again, that might be something just in the anime. So what might have very well have happened is Zoro used two-sword style when he was a little kid, and he fought Kuina like 2,000 times, and he lost every single time, and then Kuina eventually died, and her father, Koshiro, gave Zoro the Wado. What if the way this went down is that Zoro really liked using two-sword style, but now he had the Wado, and he wanted to use that one as well? So what if Koshiro or Kozaburo were the ones that told Zoro about the Santoryu style? Zoro did not invent it on his own, and I know that might be kind of taking something away from him. Like, this is Zoro's style, like, only his. Well, that's already thrown out the window, because it's very clear, like, Kawamatsu brought it up. Like, there's other samurai in Wano that use Santoryu. And it's an entire country of samurai. Surely somebody else other than Zoro had to figure out, like, hey, we can use three swords. I could use one in my one hand, one in another, and one in my butt cheeks. No, that's not good. That'll never work. Maybe in my mouth. Okay, there we go. And then they figured out Santoryu style, right? You know, I don't think Zoro was the first person in the world to invent that, okay? And if anywhere else that it would have been used, it would have been Wano, right? So maybe, you know, they didn't force it on Zoro, like, you have to master the, you are a member of the Shimotsuki Clan, Zoro. You must master Santoryu. It was nothing like that, but maybe Zoro arrived at the conclusion on his own. And that made Kozaburo, like this old man living in the village, like, he shed a tear. Like, when Zoro came to him and he's like, Master, I want to learn how to use the three-sword style. It's just a concept that I came up with, but I want to use Kuina's sword and my other two swords. And Kozaburo just kind of weeps, and he's just like, oh, Zoro, you make this old man proud. Let me show you the skills of an expert Shimotsuki. Oh! Maybe he was, like, kind of senile, or maybe given to dementia in his older age as well. So maybe, like, he told Zoro all these stories, but he also told him a bunch of stories. Like, one day maybe Kozaburo told Zoro, like, back in the day, the great sword god was our ancestor. He slayed a dragon, you know. And then Zoro's like, okay. And then another day it was like, now let me tell you the story about how I slayed Bigfoot. I was wandering around the cotton candy forest when all of a sudden he appeared. At first we were good friends and we shared a cup of sake, but then he stole my television set, so I sliced him down on top of the Tokyo Tower. And then Zoro's like, okay, Grandpa, okay. All right, but so maybe Kozaburo told all these stories, but he's just like, you couldn't determine between the ones that were actually real and the ones that were just nonsense. All right, but maybe Kozaburo taught him about the Santoryu and the stances and the style, and Zoro just picked it up from there. And of course, Zoro incorporated his own techniques, like the onigiri, you know, the 3,000 worlds, you know, Ichidai Sansen Daisen Sakai, all that stuff. Well, actually, all right, I do find it a little interesting that when Zoro used 3,000 worlds against Mihawk, you know what he prefaced that attack with? He took out his swords and he was doing the stance thing and doing a little twirly thing, and he was like, you know, Santoryu Ogi, Santoryu secret technique, 3,000 worlds. I always find it very funny when characters use that term, like Ogi or secret technique, in anime, especially if it's a move that they created. So it's like, it's kind of like Zoro, like if Zoro created the 3,000 worlds technique, then, like, you don't need to call it the secret technique. It's not like a special technique in the school of swordsmanship. You created it. You're the only one that knows about it, I guess, right? That would make onigiri a secret technique, and all of the different techniques he created only on his own, secret techniques technically, because he's the only one that knows it. But if Santoryu was an already established sword school in Wano, And Ushimaru and Kozaburo knew it, and Kozaburo or Koshiro or whoever told Zoro about it in the village growing up. They could be like, okay, this is the proper way you wield the swords, and a few of the techniques. Zoro created onigiri on his own and everything, but then it was like, before he left the village, he's like, you have one more technique you must master, the secret technique of Santoryu that was passed down through the Shimotsuki clan, and that's 3,000 worlds, or the upgraded form, Ichidai Sansen Dai Senkai, the 3 billionth fold world or whatever. And that's why it's called a secret move, not because Zoro invented it, because it was a technique. And maybe, back in the day, maybe not just the Shimotsuki clan, there might have been a bunch of different samurai in Wano, maybe parts of the Uzuki clan and Fugetsu clans, and maybe even the Kozuki clan that, use the Santoryu style in their own way as well. But it was the Shimotsuki clan that invented it and perfected it and created the secret technique 3,000 worlds, and they passed that on to Zoro. It's also, of course, that they did not tell Zoro about his lineage. Kozaburo would have known that this is my son's child, right? This is my grandson Zoro, but I'm not going to tell him that for any number of reasons. For one thing, maybe it's just like, Wano's affairs are so far removed. I don't want, this child to ever, be privy to that. Or, it might just be difficult to explain, especially if Ushimaru, if maybe Ushimaru wrote a letter before he went to battle. And he wrote a letter and he gave it to his wife. And he's like, dear, if I die, take my baby and this letter to my father. And in the letter, it explained everything that happened with Wano, Kaido, and Orochi, the death of Odin, the death of all the other daimyos, as far as he's concerned. Like, father, if you're reading this letter, we're all dead. Basically that. And so Kozaburo might have read that, when Zoro arrived at his village, and okay, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing he can do. This is one of the Yonko. This is Orochi. This is completely a horrible situation. But we should rather not tell Zoro about what happened. And maybe they just told him he was an orphan. He was an orphan maybe that washed ashore. Zoro's mother. That's another thing too. Zoro's mother might have stayed around for a while, right? Zoro's mom brought him to the village. Somebody had to bring Zoro to the village. It might not have been his mother. Maybe his mother died along the way or something. They were trying to escape Wano. It was Zoro's mom, Zoro, and then a bunch of Ushimaru's retainers, and maybe Zoro's mom got an arrow through the heart or something, and then she died and passed Zoro over to one of the retainers, take him, make sure he gets to East Blue. It's okay, and so take him, and then it was just some random, footman of the house of Ushimaru or Shimotsuki that arrived. He's like, I have this baby, and Kozaburo was like, that's my grandson, maybe something like that, and so Zoro never knew his mom either, right? And so he's like, oh, you just washed ashore one day, and we picked you up, and that's everything, right? Ushimaru was shown to have dark blue hair. So it's possible that, Zoro's mom had the green hair, or maybe a light green, teal color, and then boom, that's how you get Zoro's green hair, of course. Let's see here. There is one more thing I wanted to mention about that. So this is, the canon image of Ushimaru we get, and this is another backstory that happens, with Odin's flashback and everything, where we see all the daimyos gathering around Sukiyaki when he was sick. And it seems like this is supposed to be Ushimaru, but he has brown hair here and he looks a little different. I'm honestly of the opinion that the anime might have just messed up on this one, because it really does make sense that Ushimaru would have still have been the daimyo. Now, to be fair, Yasuie doesn't directly mention that Ushimaru fought against Kaido and died. He doesn't directly say his name. He just says the daimyo and the people of each land took up arms. Okay? So if this isn't Ushimaru, this might have very well have been his brother. Maybe his brother was the daimyo of Ringo. And then at some point between this scene and, Odin's execution, this guy might have died, and then Ushimaru took up the title. But I don't think it's going to be anything that complicated. I think this is supposed to be Ushimaru. The anime department might have just messed it up. They missed a note or something, which has definitely happened before, plenty of times. So there's precedence for that, okay? So, yeah, I'm just going to go with that. I'm going to go with, okay, Ryuma, 400 years ago, one-eyed swordsman. By the way, how did he lose an eye? Who knows? He was the sword god. He had another scar on the other side of his face. He had a lot of battles. He fought against a damn dragon. If you could fight against a damn dragon and the only thing you get out of that is a badass scar and you lose one of your eyes, I consider that a win. That's just how that goes. So Ryuma, cool swordsman. He might have had a bunch of sons and daughters, and then they continued, through the generations, the Shimotsuki clan, and then they each had a child and multiple children of their own. Cut to 400 years, or maybe 350 50-something years later, Kozaburo, well, 300 years, maybe Kozaburo was born maybe close to, like, 80, 90 years ago, and then maybe, like, 50, 60-ish years ago, Ushimaru would have been born, and then eventually Zoro would have been born. If this was the case, let's see here, 20 years ago, like, let's say during this flashback, Ushimaru was 25, that would mean he died at age 45, which means he might have been around 44 when Zoro was born? That could definitely work. That could definitely work. I guess the only other way to really make sense out of all this is you could always say that, like, Zoro is a distant cousin of the Shimotsuki. He is not the direct son of Ushimaru or the grandson of Kozaburo or anything like that. He's like a distant cousin or relative. You could do that too. But at this point, considering Kawamatsu brought all that stuff up, I think it's just going to be a direct line. It's going to go Kozaburo, Ushimaru, Zoro. Done. Make it simple and just do that, right? Well, anyway, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. That's what I have for you all today. Thanks for watching. No ant facts. I got to do some research into new ant facts. Maybe we can broaden it out to maybe some more, like, insect facts in general, because every now and then I'll be studying ants and I'll be learning about, like the predators that prey on ants, like other insects. I'm like, man, that's really interesting. Maybe I should do, facts about those insects as well. But yeah, I can give you, actually, I can give you a bat fact. Bats are everything. Okay. Bat facts! Facts about bats! Woo! All right. My dad is Batman, guys. My dad is Batman. He's very disappointed in my career choice, but he is Batman. Okay. My dad was at work today. He works at a college, and he was outside cleaning up. He's like the groundskeeper. My dad's the groundskeeper. He's the janitor. But anyway, he's there, and he saw a little tiny bat, like, under one of the gutters, one of the overhangs of the college. He's like, this little bat hanging out there. My dad took a picture and he sent it to me this morning, and he's like, oh, look, a little bat. And I'm like, oh, that's adorable. Don't move him, don't touch him, just leave him there. And my dad's like, oh, don't worry, I don't really, I'm not going to touch the bat or anything like that. And I was talking to him because, as it happens, a couple years ago when I was working at Dollar Tree, there was a bat that was outside the Dollar Tree as well, and that sparked my interest in things, so I started researching bats for like a few days. And so bats are divided into two broad categories. We have micro bats and mega bats, which are great. A mega bat is coming. And so micro bats are the bats like my dad took a picture of, little tiny bat, and they mostly eat fruit and insects and everything. It's the mega bats that are like the vampire bats that actually suck blood from like animals and whatever, okay? But microbats are really tiny, and my dad's like, well, why is it out during the day? And I was like, well, every now and then bats can get separated from the rest of them, and they don't get back to their nest or whatever, so they're just kind of stuck at certain places. The thing, though, is if you ever do see a bat out in the day, and it's not flying around, it's just like, hanging out on a tree or somewhere, just leave it alone. Leave it alone, because bats have a very high metabolism, and it burns through it very, very quickly. So bats flying around during the daytime, that can be disorienting to them, for one thing, because they're not used to flying around in the day. They're nocturnal. But also that can, burn a lot of energy for them, and they can actually die. So if you see a bat in the day hanging out by your house and it's not just doing anything, just let it chill, let it hang out, and then when the sun goes down, it'll probably go back to flying around and hunting like it normally does. It probably just got separated from the rest of it. But don't try to, like when the bat was at Dollar Tree, I was kind of annoyed because there was a bunch of kids outside, like, trying to poke it and stuff, and I had to keep, like, hey, get out of here. Don't bother the bat. He's asleep. He's sleeping. Come on. So, yeah, I mean, he was fine, by the way. Both bats are okay. But anyway, yeah, there's your bat fact for the day. Probably should come up with a better intro than that. But, all right, we're doing bat facts now? Okay. I'll be back later this week. Later, everyone. Okay, all right. No, seriously though, if you are going to make a bat fact intro, if somebody's going to make a bat fact intro, don't do the stupid, like, bat facts. No, make something Batman related. If that would be cool, that would be my request. But if you want to do it, okay, cool. Later. Bye. Because I have a feeling someone's going to.